Hey everyone, so this is a special video because I'll be taking on one of the biggest debates in the One Piece community, whether or not Zoro has Conquerors Haki. Now, Zoro fans love the idea, Zoro haters think it's ridiculous, and honestly both sides have legitimate reasons. So I'm going to try to take the entire debate, piece by piece, every single point I can think of or have heard of online, for or against Zoro having Conquerors Haki. So I'll be arguing both sides of the debate. Then at the end, I'll leave you all to come away with your own conclusions. To start with, we need to know the definition of Conquerors Haki and what it means to have it. So we're going to look at every definition or description a character gives of Conquerors Haki. Now the first time it is explained to us on Amazon Lily, we are told that it means to have the qualities of a king and the disposition to stand above others. Later on, Rayleigh gives us some more specific descriptors. It is the ability to overpower the opponent's will. It is found in the type of people who make a name for themselves on a global scale, and it is the user's very spirit manifest. Finally, Treble reiterates for us that it is proof of one who possesses the nature of a king. So those are the criteria we're given, and I'm going to try to base the following arguments mostly around that. Now there are a few things that Zoro just fits. Okay, I promise it'll be more of a back and forth debate as I move on, but for the moment let's get the easy stuff out of the way. Let's just do the automatic check marks. The disposition to stand above others. This one we don't really have to jump through hoops. Zoro fits this category. He wants to be the world's #1 swordsman, and his pride and arrogance are some of his key personality traits. He wants to make it to the top of the world and be so strong that even heaven knows his name. He has the disposition to stand above others. As Rayleigh says, it is regularly found in the type of people who make a name for themselves on the global scale. Zoro wants to be the world's strongest swordsman. Now this is where things get complicated. People with Conquerors Haki have the qualities or the nature of a king. To begin with, we need a clear understanding that this does not mean literally being royalty. Of the many royal kings and nobility we've seen in One Piece, the only one who was born royalty who had Conquerors Haki is Doflamingo. Everyone else with Conquerors Haki only became called king later in life for various reasons. The clear takeaway is that it's not literally royalty, it's one's nature. Do you as a person have the qualities of a king, a conqueror, an emperor, a ruler, etc.? It just so happens that individuals with those qualities will naturally end up in positions where they are considered kings. So the first argument we have against Zoro is that he does not fit this image. Becoming a king isn't really part of his agenda, and he doesn't really show kingly qualities. Now that's not a good look, because every single individual with Conquerors Haki has also either had some aspirations to become king, was hyped up to be a future king, has actually become some sort of a king or emperor, has reached a similar position of ruling over others, or at the very least is considered metaphorically to be a king by some. So Zoro isn't obviously king material, but if one broadens the definition of king, then Zoro could fit the mold. Remember, it's not literally about being king. Guys like Don Chinjao and I assume Dragon are just great leaders rather than kings. To start with, at the very least, Zoro is not a follower. This is hinted at multiple times, such as when Urauch pointed out that he doesn't seem like much of a man to follow others. And an important point that people forget is that if Zoro was part of any other organization besides the Straw Hats, he would consider himself the boss or in charge. We can see that when he demanded to be the boss of Baroque works in the past. So again, if we play it a little loose with the definition of qualities of a king, then Zoro does fit that mentality of being the top dog or the alpha of any group that he's part of. Part of what makes Luffy so special is that a guy like Zoro chooses to follow him. It's a case of someone with that top dog alpha mentality finding someone even more extraordinary than himself to follow. We regularly see that that's why Zoro has such high standards and expectations for Luffy as his captain. So Zoro's not a follower, but is he a leader? Well, Zoro is frequently recognized as someone who seems like a captain. And even though Zoro tends to keep to himself within the crew, we have seen that during tough times he does step up into that leadership role. We can see this especially during Water 7 and Enies Lobby. There's a reason that many consider him to be unofficially the vice captain of the Straw Hats. Yes, it's true that Zoro is mistaken for a captain, but that's usually because he seems so strong and intimidating, not necessarily because he has some leadership qualities or the traits of a king. And on top of that, yes, you may be considered a vice captain, but that's still not an official title in the story. And, of course, unofficial vice captain of the Straw Hats is a far cry from being a king. When Chinzhou discovers that Luffy has Conquerors Haki, Chinzhou asks Luffy about his aspirations to become king. So a major problem is that Zoro has no aspirations to be king of anything, as Chinzhou implies that anyone with Conquerors Haki would naturally have. As far as we can see in the near future, Zoro has no ties to being king, he has no goals to conquer anything, his dream is very individualistic, he just wants to be the world's #1 swordsman. It's undeniable that Zoro has no aspirations to be king right now, but what about the future? Maybe the author has written Zoro with this strong-willed, driven, #1 alpha mentality with hints of leadership so that maybe at some point, perhaps during Wano, he can start developing Zoro towards this sort of king-related role. After all, as far as we know, Rayleigh had no ties to being king initially. He was just given the title Dark King at some point. Maybe Zoro will be given some similar title down the road. This is a big one. The previous Pirate King's first mate also had Conquerors Haki. Zoro and Rayleigh were both the first crewmates to join the Pirate King's crew. They're both swordsmen, they both have scars over their eyes, the parallels are clear. If the previous Pirate King's first mate had Conquerors Haki, then why wouldn't Zoro? Is Luffy's crew less exceptional? Rayleigh having Conquerors Haki is a big deal, but one could argue that Rayleigh only had Conquerors Haki for plot purposes, not because of Zoro parallels or because the Pirate King's first mate is supposed to have it. There just needed to be someone to teach Luffy about Haki, and Rayleigh was the perfect character to introduce to do it. One could argue that people have misinterpreted this, that just because Rayleigh had Conquerors Haki, so will Zoro, when in reality it's entirely possible that Rayleigh was just given Conquerors Haki so that there could be a practical teacher figure for Luffy. There is one counterpoint that I have to acknowledge about this, which is that Luffy himself mentions that, wow, the crew of the Pirate King is able to beat opponents without even lifting a single finger. One could argue that this is Oda making a point of Luffy saying that the crew of a Pirate King is meant to be this exceptional, and that Luffy will have a crew member in the future who is this exceptional as well. We are initially told that Conquerors Haki is a 1 in a million ability. If too many members on the same crew start having Conquerors Haki, then 1, it stops being special, and 2, one could argue that it just doesn't make sense. It just so happens that this 1 in a million ability is possessed by so many on the same ship. On top of this, Luffy having Conquerors Haki makes him unique among the crew. Giving Conquerors Haki to someone else like Zoro kind of takes away from that Luffy specialness. However, isn't the entire crew of the Pirate King meant to be special? They are that 1 in a million crew that is destined to be more exceptional than all the crews out there, the crew that ends up on the top. It makes sense that Luffy could have a knack for picking out exceptional crewmates. It's also important to remember that Conquerors Haki is often found among those who make a name for themselves on the global scale, so people like Luffy and Zoro are inherently more likely to have it than the average person. Plus, Roger's crew had 3 members who could use Conquerors Haki. It's not that unreasonable that Luffy might have another crewmate who could use it too. Lastly, Conquerors Haki isn't that rare anymore. Oda specifically tells us this when Chinzhou says that Conquerors Haki is practically common in the New World. So Conquerors Haki isn't necessarily too rare or too special for Zoro to have. And plus, this doesn't necessarily take away from Luffy's specialness. Plenty of captains have Conquerors Haki, but Luffy would be the only captain who's so great that he actually has a member with Conquerors Haki following him. Some argue that what Zoro did to Monet is evidence of Conquerors Haki, overpowering another's will, just like Rayleigh said. Overpowering the opponent with sheer intimidation of your strength is pretty similar to overpowering another's will. One could say that this is basically Zoro getting very close to using Conquerors Haki. The simple rebuttal is who cares, this is the closest Zoro will get. He clearly is not using Conquerors Haki here, even if it seems similar. Maybe Zoro just relies on fear and intimidation to get similar results to Conquerors Haki, which shows that he doesn't really need it as a character. Rayleigh described it as the user's spirit manifest. Now we know that Zoro has a very strong spirit, and from his very first appearance he is described as having some kind of an aura. We even literally see him manifest his spirit with Asura. Someone who is able to manifest their spirit like that could be evidence for potential of Conquerors Haki. But that's not necessarily the same as Conquerors Haki though. Zoro having a strong aura and being able to manifest his spirit somehow with Asura doesn't really match what we've seen of Conquerors Haki before. Just like the Monet incident, it could just be a similar phenomena that's specific to Zoro but not really related to Conquerors Haki. Why hasn't Zoro used it yet? If Zoro had Conquerors Haki, he would have used it by now. Why didn't he use it at Fishman Island when they were up against a giant army? Why didn't he use it at Dressrosa when they were up against civilians? If Zoro does have it, he probably hasn't realized it yet. There's not really any reason for him to have been hiding it from us. I know people have speculated about his eye and whatever, but we haven't really had any sort of hints that he's been hiding Conquerors Haki. So if he does have it, it's very likely that we'd be seeing it in a future arc like Wano. An arc centered around samurai and swordsmen would be the perfect setting for Zoro to discover something about himself. This is a long one, but I think it's pretty interesting. Before Oda created One Piece, he also wrote a one-shot series called Monsters. This one-shot actually is canon to the One Piece story, as the main character is Samurai Ryuma, the famous ancient warrior whose zombie we see in Thriller Bark. Now, if you've read Monsters, it is very clear that Zoro's character is based on Ryuma. Does this remind you of anyone? There are obvious parallels to the point that Oda even had Zoro recreate Ryuma's major scene of slaying a dragon. Both Zoro and Ryuma have a sense of pride as swordsmen, they're both very principled, they're both depicted with demonic auras, and most importantly they share similar dreams of becoming #1 swordsmen. Zoro was seeking out Mihawk to challenge him at the beginning of the series, and Ryuma was also searching for a swordsman known as the King of all Swordsmen to challenge him. Now what's funny is that Ryuma actually was the King of all Swordsmen, he just didn't know that people called him that. So if you think about it, we have two very similar protagonist swordsmen that Oda has written. Ryuma was the world's #1 swordsman who literally held the title of King of all Swordsmen. The fact that Zoro's character is inspired from the King of Swordsmen could be a hint for what Oda has in mind for Zoro's character as well. So really, if Zoro is following in Ryuma's footsteps, if he's got his sword, if he's recreating his feats, if he's going to Ryuma's homeland of Wano, if all these symbolic pieces are falling into place, then it might make sense that Zoro continues to follow in Ryuma's footsteps and starts being called the King of Swordsmen as the story goes on. Now just because Zoro is based on Ryuma does not mean that they're the same character. Ryuma is a lot goofier and less stern than Zoro, and some of Ryuma's character traits can actually be seen in Luffy. Maybe Oda just likes the idea of his main character pursuing the title of King, so he passed some of Ryuma's traits onto Luffy, and some of them onto Zoro. The King of Swordsmen has never been mentioned in One Piece, and it's important to note that Mihawk is not called the King of Swordsmen. In fact, we don't even know if Mihawk has Conquerors Haki. Mihawk is #1, but in the context of One Piece, when Zoro does ultimately take that title, that doesn't mean that Zoro will be called the King of Swordsmen. So there are a lot of points both ways. Zoro is by no means the perfect candidate for Conquerors Haki, however there are enough reasons to believe that it might be a legitimate possibility. I would say that Oda has left the door open to that option. For example, a character like Chopper, it would make no sense for him to have Conquerors Haki. But with someone like Zoro, it would make sense if he had Conquerors Haki, but it also wouldn't be surprising if he didn't. I think if he does have it, Wano is the most likely arc for us to get that reveal, and it could make for a big moment. So basically we won't be getting the answer for another 2 years, but it's fun to discuss. And if you enjoyed this video, my next video will be coming out this Thursday. I'll be going back to some bare bones literary analysis, so check it out. If you like this video, then feel free to subscribe for more content every week.